Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about water temperature during water changes. I had somebody ask me recently in regards to my brackish tank whether or not I mix up my water in advance and do I preheat it, and if I do mix it up in advance, doesn't the temperature in the bucket get cold, and fall down to room temperature, so on and so forth. Just a bunch of questions, really worried about the water temperature during water changes. And when I first got started in the hobby, I was really concerned about water temperature during water changes too. In fact, I used to run my water and I'd run a thermometer under it and I'd let it run until it came up to temperature, and I'd make sure it was the exact same temperature as the tank. And eventually I got to the point where I felt comfortable enough where I could just kind of do it by feel. As long as the water coming out of the tap felt about the same, I was comfortable with that. But as time has gone on, I've come to realize that the temperature during water changes is not really that big a deal at all. First of all, I want to debunk a myth that I personally have believed for a long time. I just did a little simple experiment, which was easy enough to prove myself wrong, but I was. And that is the fact that I always thought that water really liked to hold on to its energy, and therefore it took a lot to shift the temperature of water. So when you added cold water into a tank of warmer water, that cold water didn't really have that big of an impact because of this tendency of the water to want to sort of stay warm, as it were. And I just believed that. I was told that long ago, and I just thought, okay, that sounds like it kind of makes sense. And I never really thought much more about it until somebody asked me, how does that make sense? If you took a gallon of 100-degree water and a gallon of 50-degree water and you poured them together, you should have 2 gallons of 75-degree water. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, that kind of makes sense. And so I just did a simple little experiment, more or less just that. Those temperatures weren't the same, but the result was exactly the same. I took a starting point of hot water and cold water, I mixed them together, and the end point was exactly between my two starting points. So the idea that water doesn't want to change temperature when you add cold water to a tank is not true. If you add a gallon of cold water to the tank, it's going to do as much as a gallon of cold water is going to do. But that's just it. It doesn't do a lot because you're not really talking about a lot of water when you're doing these water changes. So for example, when I did my little test, I started with 57-degree water coming out of my ground, and then I took 95-degree water coming out of my tap, and I ended up with 73 degrees or something like that, whatever it was, right there in the middle. So that was a 20-degree water temperature. That was a 35-degree water temperature difference, and yet at the end of it, it only came out to be a 15 or 18-degree water temperature difference. So let's say, for example, this tank here, and we're actually going to do a test on this tank and show you exactly what I'm talking about. But this is a 40-gallon tank. So if I did a 50% water change on it, and I used water straight out of my ground, that's about 55, 56 degrees, something like that, coming out of the ground. This temperature in this tank is about 75 degrees. So we're talking about a 20-degree difference in water temperature, and that sounds like a huge difference. But if I did a 50% water change, that only makes it a 10-degree temperature difference at the end of the water change. And while a 10-degree shift is a pretty significant shift, it's not going to necessarily be fatal for a lot of fish. It might be a little bit of a shock for them, but you've got a heater in your tank, you've got all the rocks and the gravel and the woodwork and the glass and the plants, all that is all maintaining energy. So when you put that cold water back in there, it doesn't take very long for the rest of the tank to sort of heat that water back up and bring it back up to tank temperature. So if you do drop the temperature during a water change, it's not dropped for very long. So again, I don't recommend shifting it by 10 degrees, but just to use that as an example, if I did a 50% water change and I had a 20-degree difference in water temperatures, I'm still only moving the temperature by 10 degrees. So this tank right now, to me, looks like it needs about a 10% water change. It's a 40-gallon tank, so 4 gallons is a 10% water change. It's not much. This is probably going to take at least 5 gallons or something to top it off. And I'm going to use groundwater. It's going to come out of my tap at 55 or 56 degrees, and we're going to put about 5 gallons of that water right here. But it's a 40-gallon tank, so 5 gallons, 10%, even at a 20-degree temperature difference, At the end, my temperature in this tank is probably only going to shift by a couple of degrees, and that's going to be it. So like I said, we are going to do an actual experiment, and we're going to get started on that right now. We'll do a temperature test. We will test the temperature of the water to show you exactly what the temperature is going into the tank. We're going to do a top off, and then we'll test it again, and we'll see what the end result is. And I bet you it's only going to be a couple of degrees, even though I'm going to be using a 20-degree difference in water when I do the water change. So hang on, let me get that set up, and we'll see what happens. All right, we've established a baseline. We are sitting right at 75.7. That sat there very stable for about 30 seconds. So 75.7 is going to be our starting water temperature. All right, and our first container of water is holding steady at 60.8 degrees. So it comes out of the tap at about 57. Going to warm up a little bit as it gets squirted in here. So I'm not exactly sure how much this holds. It's about 2.5 gallons. I'll measure it before the video is over so we know exactly how much water we're putting in here. And pitcher number 2 is holding steady at 57.3. Third tank is 56.4. And the final batch is going to be 56.3. Alright, it turns out that each one of these containers is just shy of 2 gallons. So putting 4 of them in there, I'm going to guesstimate put us probably around 7 gallons. So I am going to go ahead and just top it off and put about another half of one of these containers in there, which will put us up to more or less 8 gallons. I might be able to put the whole batch in here. Alright, so that's got us closer to 9 gallons, pushing 10 gallons. So that's almost a 25% water change. Let's give it a minute for that water to circulate, and then we will go ahead and take the temperature and find out what the final temperature of the tank is. And our final temperature is 71.7 degrees. If I remember correctly, we started out at 75.7 or 75.6, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we're going to call it a 4-degree temperature drop. If you want to go crazy and say it's a 5-degree temperature drop, go ahead. 5 degrees isn't going to make those fish bat an eyelash. And as I said, this tank is not heated. I don't actually have a heater in it, or actually I might have a heater in this tank. I don't even remember, to tell you the truth. If I do have a heater in this tank, it's set at like 72 or 73 degrees, and it would just be sort of a fail-safe in case the room really got too cold. Then the heater would keep the tank at what we'll just call room temperature of, mid-70s. So 75 degrees dropping down to 71 degrees, it probably does that over the course of the night. And the fish themselves, probably if they were out in the wild, could experience a 4 or 5 degree temperature drop. If they swam from the surface down to the deeper areas of the body of water they were in, would probably be a several degree temperature difference. So again, big water change, probably 20 to 25% at a 20 degree water temperature difference, or roughly 20 degree water temperature difference. And I only shifted the tank temperature by 4 degrees. So there you go. That should be proof positive for you that you don't really have to worry too much about getting your tank temperature exactly matched to your tap water when you're doing a water change. Now, I still run warm water, and I still put my hand under it to sort of approximate the tank temperature. I don't just run straight cold water into my tank. But it's nothing you need to worry about is what I'm saying. Just go ahead and get it close and do your water change, and don't think about it twice. You don't have to match those temperatures perfectly. If you've got a bucket that's been sitting out and it's room temperature and your tank is 80 degrees and there's a 4 or 5 degree difference in the bucket and the tank, it isn't going to shift your tank temperature at all. You've got to put a lot of really cold water into a tank to start bringing that temperature down. So there you go. Proof positive. Don't worry about it. But thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you real soon in the next one.